sat on the cold, dusty floor, tears streaming down her face like a river that refused to dry up. She had made a big mistake. It felt like the earth beneath her had crumbled. Her heart ached with the weight of her choices, knowing she had no one to blame but herself. The man she had loved, the one who had brought light into her life, was gone, lost because of her own foolishness. As she sat there, drowning in a sea of regret, Eno wished with all her heart that she could turn back the hands of time. She was haunted by the what-ifs and if-onlys that echoed in her mind. Let's go back to how it all started. Eno was a young, strikingly beautiful woman who had been born and raised in the vibrant city of Lagos. By day, she was a quiet and responsible teacher, shaping young minds in the classroom. But when night fell, Eno transformed into someone entirely different. She loved the thrill of the nightlife, the pulse of the city after dark, and the excitement of living on the edge. The party scene was her playground, and men were her toys. Each night, she would go home with a different man, her life a whirlwind of reckless decisions and fleeting pleasures. Her friends often worried about her, urging her to slow down, to think about the future. But Eno would always laugh them off, insisting that she wanted to squeeze every drop of enjoyment out of life before she got old, or even worse, got tied down by the shackles of marriage. Eventually, her friends gave up, leaving her to her own devices, while they stood on the sidelines, watching her dance through life like a candle burning at both ends. Then something unexpected happened. Eno met someone who began to tame her wild spirit. His name was Toby. They crossed paths in the most modern way on the social media platform. It all started when Toby stumbled upon one of her comments, and curious about the woman behind the words, he clicked on her profile. There, her beauty and grace in her photos caught his eyes, and he couldn't resist sending her a message. It took a few days, but eventually she responded. What started as a casual conversation quickly grew into something more. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams. Toby was a gentle and thoughtful young man, the only child of his hardworking parents. Though they weren't very wealthy, his parents did everything they could to provide him with the best education. After he completed his secondary school, they made the tough decision to send him abroad to further his studies. It was a tough one for them because Toby was their only child, but he promised to return home as soon as he graduated. As their only child, Toby's parents put him under constant pressure. They began nudging him to find a good Nigerian girl to marry, hoping for the joy of grandchildren. But finding the right wife was proven to be much harder than his parents had imagined. The perfect woman wasn't just going to appear out of nowhere. For Toby, meeting Eno felt like the heavens had answered his prayers. What struck him the most was discovering that she was a teacher. Could this be the wife he had been searching for? He asked himself. At first, Eno did not seem particularly interested in Toby. She was just having fun, chatting casually. But when she realized he was living abroad pursuing his studies, her interest peaked. Studying abroad often meant wealth, and Eno quickly saw Toby as more than just another man in her life. She saw him as her golden ticket. She began to give him her full attention. She had finally hit jackpot. Eno and Toby's relationship grew stronger with each passing day. When Toby finally proposed, Eno did not hesitate. She accepted in a heartbeat. Her friends, however, were skeptical. They couldn't understand why she would agree to marry someone she had never even met in person. What if he turns out to be different from what you're expecting? They asked, their voices filled with concern. But Eno would only smile and brush off their worries. None of that matters, she would say confidently. As long as he's got money, I'm happy. You're all just jealous I found a good catch. Once again, her friends learned to keep their opinions to themselves. A year after their meeting online, Toby finished his own studies and returned to Nigeria, just as he had promised his parents. The reunion was filled with joy and relief. His parents overjoyed to finally have their son back home. But while Toby was happy to see his parents again, there was something, or rather someone, he was even more excited about meeting. Eno. When they finally met face to face, Toby was struck by how much more beautiful Eno was in real life. Her beauty was only matched by the kindness she had shown him over the phone. As for Eno, she was pleasantly surprised by Toby's quiet, handsome demeanor. She couldn't wait to boast to her friends that he was every bit the catch she had boasted about. In that moment, everything seemed to be falling into place. Without wasting any time, Toby took Eno to meet his family. His parents were thrilled, their eyes lighting up with joy when they saw the woman their son had chosen. They welcomed Eno warmly, grateful that Toby had found such a lovely and promising wife. In return, Eno introduced Toby to her family, proudly declaring him as the man she wanted to spend her life with. Her family was equally welcoming, embracing Toby as if he had always been a part of their lives. Following tradition, both families met to discuss the marriage. They came together like old friends, sharing stories as they planned the wedding. The preparations moved quickly, with everyone eager to see the young couple start their new life together. 2 months later, Eno and Toby stood side by side, surrounded by their loved ones as they became husband and wife. Their journey as a married couple had begun, and together they stepped into the future, ready to build a life. Toby was the picture of a perfect husband. He was everything a woman could ask for in a husband. He was kind, attentive, and utterly devoted to Eno from the start of their marriage. He loved her deeply and cared for her every need, ensuring that she never lacked anything. With his impressive qualifications and a little help from his parents pulling some strings, Toby secured a high-paying job at an oil company. His salary was more than enough to give Eno the life she wanted, with plenty left over to keep them both comfortable. Their home was running smoothly, and everyone seemed genuinely happy. A year later, their happiness seemed to reach new heights when they welcomed a baby girl into their lives. The entire family rejoiced, feeling as though God had blessed them even further. Toby in particular was over the moon. His heart was overflowing with joy as he held his daughter in his arms. He had always desired to be a father. He felt like the luckiest man alive. But while he was basking in the glow of new fatherhood, Eno's feelings were more complex. She was glad to have given Toby the child he had longed for, but there was a shadow over her heart that she couldn't shake. The truth was, Eno was deeply troubled by something she couldn't ignore. Toby could not satisfy her in the bedroom the way she needed. In the beginning, she had hoped that things would improve as they grew closer and became more comfortable with each other. But after a year of marriage, nothing had changed. Toby was gentle, calm, and tender in every aspect of life, including the bedroom. But Eno did not want tenderness. She craved the wild, passionate frenzy of the men she had known before Toby. She wanted excitement, the kind that made her feel alive. And Toby, for all his love and care, just wasn't the man to give her that. Worse still, he struggled to keep up with her for more than 5 minutes. When Eno could no longer bear her frustration, she began to voice her complaints to Toby. True to his gentle nature, he did not react with anger or defensiveness. Instead, he took her concerns to heart and decided to find a way to improve. He wanted nothing more than to keep his wife happy. So he threw himself into research, determined to become a better husband Eno desired. Toby spent hours reading articles online, scouring the internet for advice on how to enhance his skills. He even went as far as watching explicit content to help him learn techniques that could ignite the passion Eno craved. But no matter how hard he tried, Toby always fell short of Eno's expectations. Her desires were wild and intense, far beyond what Toby could satisfy. As much as he tried to meet her needs, she remained unsatisfied. Her complaints became more frequent and more bitter. Toby, exhausted from long days at the office, began to dread coming home. The pressure to fulfill Eno's insatiable needs was taking a toll on him, both physically and emotionally. What might have seemed like a trivial issue to outsiders was becoming a serious problem in their home. Eventually, Eno got tired of complaining. She realized that no matter the amount of pleading or nagging was going to change the situation. So she made a decision that she thought would solve the problem once and for all. She bought herself toys to use when Toby wasn't around. With these new additions, she found a way to satisfy her cravings without having to rely on her husband. For a while, this arrangement seemed to work. The tension in her home eased, and life carried on as usual. Eno kept her secret, and Toby remained blissfully unaware of his wife's new coping mechanism. But everything changed one fateful day, when Toby's best friend Kunle returned to Nigeria after living in South Africa for several years. The two men had been close since childhood, and their reunion was long overdue. Toby was excited to reconnect with Kunle, so he invited him over to meet Eno and their daughter. He had no idea that this seemingly innocent visit would mark a turning point in his life. The moment Eno set eyes on Kunle, she felt a spark that she hadn't felt in a long time. Kunle was nothing like Toby. He had the body of an Egyptian god, muscular and imposing, with a strong, confident presence that drew people in. There was something undeniably sensual about him, a raw masculinity that radiated from every pore. As Eno watched him, she felt an undeniable pull towards him, a desire that was both thrilling and dangerous. Throughout lunch, Eno struggled to keep her composure. She made polite conversation, but her mind was elsewhere. Consumed by thoughts of Kunle, she imagined what it would be like to be with him, to feel those strong hands on her body, to experience the kind of passion she had only ever dreamed of. Every time Kunle spoke, his deep voice sent shivers down her spine, and every glance he gave her felt charged with unspoken desire. By the time the meal was over, Eno was in turmoil. She had barely touched her food, too distracted by the magnetic pull she felt toward Kunle. Even after he left, she could not get him out of her mind. The more she thought about him, the more she wanted him. and she knew that her feelings were more than just a passing fancy. Kunle had awakened something in her that she couldn't ignore, a hunger that had been lying dormant for far too long. She couldn't control them. She was playing with fire, and deep down, she knew it. The only person blissfully unaware of the tension in the air that day was Toby. He was too caught up in the joy of reconnecting with his childhood friend to notice the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Toby's excitement over Kunle's presence blinded him to the silent exchange between his wife and his best friend. He had always trusted Eno, believing that their marriage was strong and that their love was enough to withstand any test. Kunle, however, was not so innocent. He noticed everything. From the way Eno's eyes lingered on him a little too long, to the subtle way she shifted in her seat, as if drawn to him by an invisible force. He was no stranger to the attention of women. In fact, he was used to it. Women were often captivated by his presence, drawn in by his confident demeanor and the aura of mystery he carried. Kunle enjoyed the chase, the thrill of the game, and he had never been one to shy away from a challenge. But this time, things were different. Eno wasn't just any woman. She was Toby's wife, and that made her off limits. Kunle knew that crossing the line would betray the trust of the one person who had always been like a brother to him. He told himself that he would be very careful, that he would need to keep his distance and avoid any situation that might tempt him to stray. Yet, even as he made this resolution, he could not help but feel a spark of excitement at the attention Ina was giving him. The way she looked at him made his pulse quicken, and for a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to give in to the temptation. Avoiding Eno, however, proved to be far more difficult than Kunle had anticipated. The two men quickly fell into a routine of meeting every Saturday at Toby's house to watch basketball games. It became their way of making up for long lost years they had spent apart. Each week, Kunle would arrive at Toby's home, determined to keep things light and friendly, to stay focused on the game and nothing else. But as soon as he walked in through the door, all his good intentions would evaporate. Eno had become increasingly bold in her pursuit of Kunle. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she reveled in the power she felt over him. She would take extra care with her appearance every Saturday, dressing in the sexiest outfits she owned, garments that hugged her curves and showcased her best assets. She would glide through the room with an air of confidence, her every move calculated to draw Kunle's attention. When she served drinks and snacks, she would make sure she would bend, offering him a view that left little to the imagination. Toby, ever trusting, remained oblivious to the silent seduction playing out right in front of him. He was too engrossed in the game, too caught up in the camaraderie of old friends, to notice the way Kunle's eyes followed Eno as she moved about the room. Toby was the perfect host, laughing and joking with Kunle, completely unaware that his wife was making subtle advances towards his best friend. Kunle, on the other hand, was anything but oblivious. Every glance, every movement, every word Eno spoke was designed to test his resolve. And he felt himself pulled further into the web she was weaving. He could feel his self-control slipping away, the lines he had drawn in his heart becoming increasingly blurred. Eno's allure was impossible to ignore, and as much as Kunle tried to keep his distance, he found himself more and more captivated by her. As the weeks went by, Kunle began to wonder how long he could keep up the charade. He told himself that he could handle it, that he was in control, but deep down, he knew that it was only a matter of time before something had to give. The tension between them was building to a breaking point, and Kunle could feel it. The question was not if he would give in, but when and what the consequences would be when he did. One day, the perfect opportunity to corner Kunle came to Eno on a platter of gold. It was a Saturday like any other, and Kunle had come over to the house for their usual weekend hangout. He expected to find Toby ready for their usual banter and basketball, but to his surprise, Toby wasn't home. An emergency at the office had come up, and Toby had to leave abruptly, forgetting to inform Kunle about the change in plans. Eno saw this as the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to execute a plan that had been simmering in her mind for weeks. When Kunle arrived, Eno greeted him at the door with a smile that was warmer than usual. "Come in, Kunle," she said, her voice sweet and inviting. Kunle hesitated, noticing the absence of Toby's familiar laughter from the living room. "Where is Toby?" he asked, stepping inside cautiously. "He's not home," Eno replied, casually closing the door behind him. Kunle immediately felt a surge of discomfort. He knew he should leave, but before he could make up his mind, Eno stood in his path, blocking his way to the door. She leaned against the wall, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Not so fast, handsome," she said, her voice dripping with seduction. "Today is a lucky day. There's no one but the two of us in this big empty house," she added, biting her lower lip provocatively. Kunle felt a wave of panic wash over him, his body betraying him as he began to sweat profusely. This was a line he couldn't cross, a boundary that once broken could never be mended. "Stop this, Eno," he said, his voice trembling with both fear and desire. "You are my best friend's wife. This is wrong in every possible way, and it has to stop now," he insisted, trying to push her hands away, but his voice lacked the firmness he wished it had, and even as he spoke, he could feel his resolve weakening. But Eno was not one to give up easily. She was determined, her eyes locked into his with a fiery intensity. She stepped closer, pressing her body against his, her breath hot against his skin. "Come on, Kunle," she whispered, her voice low and sultry. "Look into my eyes and tell me you don't want this. I see the way you look at me when Toby isn't watching. You want this just as much as I do," she said, her hands roaming over his chest. Kunle's breath hitched, his pulse quickening as his mind became foggy. He knew he should walk away, but his body was betraying him, responding to Eno's touch in ways he couldn't control. "There's a child upstairs," he managed to say, his voice hoarse and strained. "She's sound asleep," Eno encountered, her lips brushing against his ear as she spoke. "Besides, she's only 1 year old. She can't understand anything," she added, her hands moving lower. With the last remnants of his resolve crumbling to dust, Kunle gave in to the temptation that had been building for weeks. He pulled Eno into him, their bodies colliding with a force that sent shockwaves through them. Their kisses were frantic, filled with wild, untamed passion that neither of them had ever felt before. Eno's touch was electric, and Kunle found himself lost in the moment, all thoughts of right and wrong disappearing as he succumbed to his desires. It was everything Eno had imagined and more. Kunle was exactly the kind of lover she had been craving. Wild, passionate and completely uninhibited. He matched her energy, giving as much as he took. And by the time they were done, she was left breathless and wanting more. Kunle too found himself surprised by the intensity of their encounter. He had expected to feel regret, to be consumed by guilt after betraying his best friend in the worst possible way. But instead, he felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. Eno was unlike any woman he had ever been with. Fierce, demanding, and utterly captivating. He couldn't get enough of her, and the thrill of the forbidden liaison only made her more desirable. From that day, Kunle and Eno began their forbidden affair. But Toby was totally unaware of what was going on behind his back. Work was becoming more and more hectic, especially since the company was opening a branch in the US. Everyone was putting in their best to see it work. But as you all know, nothing remained a secret forever. The first cracks began to appear as Toby's seemingly perfect life hit rock bottom. He worked in agro oil and gas as the accountant. His meticulous attitude towards his work had set him apart so many times. However, it did not sit well with some of the workers. Someone started siphoning funds and set him up. Ultimately, he lost his job. Toby was devastated. He cried for mercy, but no one listened to him. He had worked so hard for the company, and all his hard work had gone down the drain. But Eno cared less about her husband's dilemma. She was so wrapped up with her budding affair with Kunle, and since the money was no longer coming in as it had, she totally lost respect for her husband. She spoke to him as she pleased, went out and came back whenever she liked. Toby could not shake the growing unease that had settled in his heart. His wife had become a stranger, distant and cold. She was always out of the house, leaving him alone to care for their daughter. It wasn't as if she still had a job. She had quit teaching as soon as they got married. But now, her constant absence and change in her behavior gnawed at him. Where was she going? What was she doing? One day, Toby decided he could not take it any longer. He had to find out what was really going on. So when Eno left the house that morning, he quickly bundled their daughter into the car and followed her. His heart pounded as he trailed her at a safe distance, not wanting to believe the worst, but fearing it all the same. To his shock, she pulled up in front of Kunle's house. Toby's mind raced. He did not want to jump into conclusions, so he decided to wait, his eyes fixed on the front door. Hours passed, and Toby's anxiety grew with every minute. Finally, the door opened, and what he saw sent a jolt of anger and betrayal through his entire being. Eno and Kunle walked out, hand in hand, laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. Toby's heart boiled with rage. He could not hold back any longer. He stormed out of the car, his emotions a whirlwind of hurt and anger. "So this is what you two have been doing behind my back," he yelled, his voice trembling. "I'm such a fool. I should have known." Kunle froze, his face draining of color. His heart pounded as he faced his best friend, guilt consuming him. But Eno, she did not flinch. Her expression remained cold, almost bored. "Now that you know, what are you going to do about it?" she replied, her tone as icy as her gaze. Toby stared at her, his eyes filled with pain he couldn't put into words. "I loved you, Eno," he said, his voice breaking. "I did everything to keep you happy. And this is how you repay me, by sleeping with my best friend." Eno crossed her arms, completely unfazed by his anguish. "You tried to keep me happy? Well, you did not try hard enough. You are too calm, too gentle. You can't even last more than 5 minutes in bed. But unlike you, Kunle here is a real man. He matches my energy in every way. I was even willing to keep managing you. But now you've lost your job. What can you offer me?" Her words were sharp, cutting through Toby's heart like a knife. As Eno's cruel words echoed in the air, Kunle stood in stunned silence. He had expected this confrontation to be bad, but nothing had prepared him for the venom in Eno's voice. Seeing the hurt in Toby's eyes made him regret every moment of their affair. But what shocked him the most was Eno's utter lack of remorse. She was heartless, mean, and completely unworthy of a man like Toby. In that moment, something shifted in Kunle. His initial thrill and excitement turned into a cold resolve. Eno might have thought she had won, that she could walk over Toby without consequence. But Kunle decided he would not let her get away with it. She was about to learn a bitter lesson, one that she would not forget anytime soon. Toby looked the two of them one last time. "The both of you deserve each other." With that, he turned and marched towards his car, completely shattered and heartbroken. Later that night, Eno returned home with a cold determination. Without saying a word to Toby, she packed all her belongings, stuffing her clothes into bags as if she couldn't wait to leave. She did not even spare them a glance. She walked out of the door, abandoning her husband and her daughter without a second thought. Toby watched her go, but he made no move to stop her. He had already made up his mind. Eno did not deserve his tears, his pain, or his love. She had made her choice, and now he had to make his own. The next day, Toby informed both families about what happened, just to make them aware. Eno's parents were distraught, begging him to reconsider, to forgive their daughter and take her back. "It's pointless," he told them calmly. "She has chosen to be with another man. There's nothing left to discuss." His own mother, concerned and worried, offered to come stay with him and his daughter to help them through this difficult time. But Toby politely declined. "I just wanted you to know that she left, Mother. I don't need anyone pitying me. I am absolutely fine," he reassured her, though his heart still ached. Meanwhile, Eno moved in with Kunle, thinking she had finally found the life she wanted. The affair continued as before, wild and passionate, but Eno did not realize that something had changed. Kunle now looked at her with a different eye, eyes filled not with desire, but with cold calculation. He was on a mission, determined to pay her back for the betrayal she had inflicted on Toby, and he would do it in a way that would cut her to the very core. At first, Eno did not notice the shift. The sex was still as thrilling as ever, and she reveled in the excitement of it all. But soon, Kunle began to bring other women into the house, flaunting them right in front of her. Every night, a new woman would appear, and Eno had to endure the humiliation of listening to them, seeing them, knowing that Kunle was with them just as he had been with her. Eno's frustration boiled over. She confronted him one night, after yet another woman had left, her voice trembling with rage. "This has to stop, Kunle. Enough is enough. How can you bring girls into this house every night in my presence?" She barked, her anger barely contained. Kunle looked at her, his expression one of feigned confusion. "This house," he slowly replied, "is my house, and I can bring anyone I want into it. If you don't like it, use the door." Eno's eyes flashed with fury. "No, you can't. Not anymore. I've tolerated this madness from you long enough, but I won't stand for it any longer." But Kunle only laughed, a cold, heartless sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You are not my wife, Eno, and you're not my girlfriend. You're no different from those other girls. What makes you think you have the right to tell me what I can and cannot do?" Eno's anger turned to desperation. "How could you be so cruel? I left my husband for you," she cried, her voice breaking. Kunle's eyes hardened. "You did that on your own, for yourself," he said, cutting her off. "You're the one who started this whole mess. You abandoned your family, not for me, but for your own selfish reasons. Don't try to blame anyone else for the choices you made." And with that, he walked away, leaving Eno standing there, her world crashing down around her. Eno's world started to crumble as the reality of her choices set in. She had left everything behind, believing that Kunle would be her new beginning, that he would cherish her and eventually make her his wife. But as the days turned into weeks, it became painfully clear that Kunle had no such intentions. Eno knew she couldn't return to Toby. After the venomous words she had spewed and the trust she had shattered, she doubted he would even want to look at her, let alone take her back. The thought of losing both men was unbearable. She resolved to fight for Kunle, to make him see her worth, even if it meant swallowing her pride. Determined, Eno continued to endure Kunle's disrespect, hoping that if she stayed long enough, he might soften towards her. But the situation only worsened. He continued to openly flaunt his other women, bringing her into the home they now shared. Each night, as she listened to the laughter and the muffled sounds coming from the other room, Eno's resolve grew weaker, her heart heavier. Still, she held on, believing that her patience would eventually pay off. But one day, her patience snapped. There was a particular woman Kunle had started seeing more frequently, a young and beautiful lady who seemed to be everything Eno wasn't. She was vibrant, carefree, and most importantly, she had Kunle's full attention. Eno couldn't stand it any longer. She followed the woman one afternoon, waiting for the perfect moment. When she confronted her, the rage she had bottled up for so long exploded. Eno attacked her, her fists landing blow after blow, until the girl was left sobbing and terrified on the ground. "Stay away from my man," Eno warned, her voice trembling with fury. When Kunle found out what Eno had done, he was livid. Already, he had had a bad day. He stormed home, his face twisted in anger. "How dare you!" he roared as he entered the house, his voice echoing through the walls. Eno tried to defend herself, but Kunle wasn't having any of it. He lashed out, striking her repeatedly until she was left bruised and crying on the floor. Without another word, he grabbed her things, threw them out the door, and shoved her out after them. "We are done," he spat, slamming the door shut behind her. Eno banged on the door, begging him to let her in. But Kunle did not care. She was nothing to him now. With nowhere to go, Eno gathered her belongings and sat in her car, her mind racing with regret. She had thrown away a good man for nothing. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the gravity of her mistakes. She spent the night in her car, cold and alone, with only her thoughts for company. By morning, she had made up her mind. She would go back to Toby. He was a kind man. Definitely, he would forgive her if she apologized sincerely enough. At first light, Eno drove to the house she had once called home, rehearsing her apology over and over in her mind. But when she arrived, her heart sank. The gates were locked, and a large sign on the front gate read, "To Let." The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Toby had moved on, literally. Her hands shook as she clutched the steering wheel, her last hope slipping through her fingers. What Eno did not know was that while she was wallowing in regret, Toby's life had taken an unexpected turn. After losing his job, he had been at his lowest, but things quickly changed. His boss, who had always admired Toby's meticulous work ethic, had never fully believed the accusations against him. After a thorough investigation, it was revealed that Toby had been framed, and the real culprit was exposed. To make amends, the company not only reinstated Toby, but also offered him a position at their new branch in Texas. They even provided visas for him and his daughter, giving him a fresh start in a new city. Kunle, burdened by the weight of guilt, couldn't shake the shame of what he had done. The betrayal gnawed at him day and night, until he couldn't take it any longer. Desperate for redemption, he decided to seek out Toby and beg for his forgiveness. But when Kunle returned to the house where Toby once lived, he found it empty. That was how he knew that something had gone wrong. Thinking Toby had simply moved to a new address, Kunle drove to Toby's parents' house, hoping they could tell him where to find his friend. Toby's parents greeted him warmly when he arrived, unaware that Kunle was the very person who had wrecked their son's marriage. They were surprised to hear that Kunle did not know about Toby's new life. He is relocated to Texas, in the US, they said, their voice filled with pride for their son's new beginning. Kunle's heart sank. The reality of what he had done hit him like a sledgehammer. He had betrayed his closest friend, and now Toby was gone, possibly forever. There was no way to undo the damage, no chance to make things right. Eno, after finding the house empty, found herself at Kunle's door once again. She was desperate, hoping that Kunle might have some information. But when Kunle coldly revealed the truth that Toby had moved abroad with his daughter, Eno's world came crashing down. She crumpled to the ground, tears streaming down her face as she realized the full extent of what she had lost. Her husband was gone, her daughter was gone, and now there was no way back. She sat there broken and defeated. No husband, no child, no money. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The number on the screen seemed unfamiliar, but she answered it, her voice barely above a whisper. The words on the other end of the line sealed her fate. It was Toby's lawyer. He had filed for a divorce. The finality of it was like a knife to her heart. Her life as she knew it was over. How could she face her family? What would she tell her friends? The shame was too much to bear. Meanwhile, far away in Texas, Toby was rebuilding his life. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it had begun to fade. With his daughter by his side and a promising new job, Toby was starting to find peace. He was determined to create a good life for them both. Though the scars of betrayal ran deep, Toby still believed in true love. His parents had shown him that it was real, and he held on to the hope that one day he would find the right person to share his life with. But for now, his focus was on healing and on providing a bright future for his little girl, leaving the heartache of the past where it belonged, in the past. Hey lovers, thank you for listening to this story. If you're new here, welcome to my space. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you have not done so already, please hit the subscribe button. And to support the growth of our community, give this video a big thumbs up and drop a comment. I'll take my leave now, but I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.